In an era when war was considered an exclusively male domain, a single woman managed to outwit the entire Nazi intelligence apparatus, becoming the Gestapo's most wanted person in occupied France. Nancy Wake was not just another spy. She was a phantom haunting the nightmares of German officers, an invisible force that could be anywhere at any time, dismantling their operations from within. What the Nazis didn't know was that their most elusive prey was also one of the most ordinary-looking women, someone who could blend seamlessly into a crowd, only to reappear where they least expected. The woman they called the White Mouse would prove that the greatest weapon against tyranny wasn't superior firepower or advanced technology, but the unbreakable will of someone who refused to surrender. By the time the war ended, this single individual had orchestrated more successful sabotage operations than entire military units, transforming from a society journalist into the most feared resistance operative in occupied Europe. Nancy Grace Augusta Wake was born on August 30, 1912 in Wellington, New Zealand, but her family moved to Australia when she was just 2 years old. Growing up in Sydney, she displayed an independent spirit that would later serve her well in the underground war against fascism. At 16, she ran away from home with a small inheritance, determined to see the world beyond the confines of her conservative upbringing. Her journey took her to London, where she trained as a journalist, and then to Paris in the early 1930s, where she worked as a correspondent for the Hearst newspaper group. It was during a reporting assignment in Vienna in 1933 that Wake witnessed Nazi brutality firsthand. She saw Jewish people being beaten in the streets by brown shirts, an experience that ignited a fierce hatred of fascism that would drive her for the rest of her life. This moment of witnessing systematic cruelty transformed a young journalist into someone who would dedicate her life to fighting tyranny, though she had no idea that within a decade she would become one of the most effective resistance fighters in history. In 1937, Nancy met Henri Fiocca, a wealthy French industrialist, and their whirlwind romance led to marriage in 1939. The couple settled in Marseille, where Nancy enjoyed the comfortable life of a well-to-do expatriate wife. However, their peaceful existence was shattered when Germany invaded France in May 1940. As the Nazi war machine rolled across Europe, Nancy watched in horror as her adopted country fell under occupation. The woman who had once attended elegant dinner parties and social gatherings now found herself living under the shadow of the swastika. But rather than flee to safety, Nancy made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She chose to stay and fight. What began as small acts of defiance, like helping stranded Allied soldiers, gradually evolved into something far more dangerous. By 1941, she had become a key figure in the French resistance, using her social connections and innocent appearance to gather intelligence and coordinate escape routes for Allied airmen shot down over France. The transformation from socialite to saboteur was not immediate, but it was complete. Nancy's first major operation involved establishing an escape route that would become known as the Pat O'Leary line, named after the Belgian officer who helped coordinate it. This network stretched from Marseille to the Spanish border, a distance of over 300 miles through some of the most heavily patrolled territory in occupied France. Nancy's role was to act as a courier, carrying messages, money, and false documents to safe houses along the route. Her ability to charm German checkpoints became legendary among her fellow resistance fighters. She would approach Nazi soldiers with a disarming smile, speaking fluent German and French, often flirting just enough to distract them from thoroughly searching her belongings. Hidden in her clothing, handbag, or bicycle frame were coded messages that could mean the difference between life and death for dozens of Allied personnel. What made Nancy particularly effective was her understanding that the best disguise was not elaborate costumes or false identities, but rather the ability to become genuinely invisible by being exactly what people expected to see, a well-dressed, charming woman going about her daily business. As Nancy's activities intensified, so did the Gestapo's interest in the mysterious woman who seemed to be connected to every successful escape operation in southern France. By 1943, they had placed a bounty of 5 million francs on her head, an astronomical sum that reflected just how much damage she was inflicting on German operations. The nickname White Mouse came from frustrated Gestapo officers who complained that she slipped through their fingers like a mouse, always managing to disappear just when they thought they had her cornered. What they didn't realize was that Nancy's success came not from superhuman abilities, but from meticulous preparation and an almost supernatural ability to read people and situations. She studied the habits of German patrols, memorized the schedules of trains and checkpoints, and cultivated a network of contacts that spanned from fishermen to aristocrats. Her safe houses were chosen not for their remoteness, but for their ordinariness. Apartments above bakeries, rooms in boarding houses, even the guest quarters of collaborators who had no idea what was happening under their own roofs. The Gestapo was looking for a master spy, but Nancy Wake was something far more dangerous. She was a master of human psychology. The net was closing around Nancy by early 1943. Several members of her network had been captured and tortured, and she knew it was only a matter of time before someone broke under interrogation and revealed her identity. The decision to flee France was agonizing. It meant abandoning her husband Henri, who refused to leave his business interests behind, and the resistance fighters who had come to depend on her. But staying would have meant certain capture and death, not just for herself, but for everyone connected to her operations. Her escape across the Pyrenees into Spain was a harrowing journey that took 6 attempts over several months. Each failed crossing meant returning to France and finding new safe houses, new contacts, new ways to evade the ever-tightening German surveillance. When she finally made it to Spain in late 1943, she was exhausted, malnourished, and heartbroken, but she was also free. From Spain, she made her way to Gibraltar and then to London, where British intelligence was eager to debrief the woman who had become a legend among resistance circles. What they discovered was someone whose intimate knowledge of occupied France and proven ability to operate behind enemy lines made her invaluable for the next phase of the war. In London, Nancy was recruited by the Special Operations Executive, SOE, the British organization tasked with conducting espionage, sabotage, and reconnaissance in occupied Europe. The training was brutal. She learned to kill silently with her bare hands, to operate radio equipment, to handle explosives, and to withstand interrogation. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to think like a military commander rather than just a courier. The SOE was preparing her not just to gather intelligence, but to lead resistance forces in coordinated attacks against German infrastructure. Her instructors were amazed by her natural aptitude for guerrilla warfare tactics and her ability to inspire confidence in others. One training report noted that she possessed an exceptional combination of courage, intelligence, and leadership ability that makes her ideally suited for independent operations behind enemy lines. What set Nancy apart from other SOE agents was her intimate knowledge of French culture and her existing network of contacts. While other agents would be dropped into hostile territory as strangers, Nancy would be returning home, albeit to a home that had been transformed by 3 years of occupation and resistance warfare. On the night of April 29, 1944, Nancy Wake parachuted back into France as part of Operation Freelance, landing in the Auvergne region of central France. Her mission was to coordinate with local resistance groups in preparation for D-Day, which was still weeks away. What she found was a patchwork of competing factions, poorly armed groups, and widespread distrust between different resistance organizations. The Free French Forces, communist partisans, and independent Maquis groups all had different agendas and leadership structures. Nancy's first challenge was not fighting Germans, but uniting French resistance fighters, who were often more suspicious of each other than of their common enemy. Her approach was characteristically direct. She called a meeting of all the major resistance leaders in the region and laid out a simple proposition. They could continue fighting each other while the Germans picked them off one by one, or they could unite under her coordination and actually make a difference in the war. Her reputation as the White Mouse preceded her, and gradually, the various factions agreed to work together. Within weeks, she had transformed a collection of scattered guerrilla bands into a coordinated fighting force of over 7,000 men. The scale of Nancy's operations in 1944 was staggering. Her forces destroyed over 1,000 German vehicles, derailed dozens of trains, cut telephone lines across hundreds of miles of territory, and eliminated more than 1,400 German soldiers. But perhaps her most famous exploit was a 500-mile bicycle ride to re-establish contact with London after her radio operator was captured. The journey took her through German checkpoints, across mountain passes, and through territory crawling with enemy patrols. She rode for over 72 hours with minimal rest, carrying coded messages that were crucial for coordinating resistance activities with the Allied invasion. When she finally reached her destination, her contact couldn't believe that the exhausted woman standing before him had just completed one of the most daring courier missions of the entire war. The information she carried helped coordinate resistance attacks that disrupted German reinforcements heading toward the Normandy beaches, contributing directly to the success of D-Day. But for Nancy, the bicycle ride was just another day's work. She was back in the field within 48 hours, planning the next sabotage operation. As the Allied forces advanced across France in the summer of 1944, Nancy's role evolved from saboteur to military commander. She led direct assaults on German positions, coordinated with advancing Allied units, and helped liberate entire towns and villages. Her forces captured a German garrison at Montluçon, freed hundreds of prisoners from a detention camp, and secured vital bridges and roads for the advancing Allies. What made Nancy's leadership style unique was her combination of tactical brilliance and genuine care for her fighters. She insisted on personally leading the most dangerous missions, shared the same rations and sleeping conditions as her troops, and never asked anyone to take a risk she wouldn't take herself. Her fighters, many of whom had initially been skeptical of taking orders from a woman, came to regard her with something approaching reverence. One former Maquis fighter later recalled, "She was not just our commander, she was our inspiration." When Nancy Wake told you that a mission was possible, you believed it, because she had already proven that impossible things could be done. By the time France was liberated, Nancy had become one of the most decorated Allied agents of the war, but she had also paid a terrible personal price. The cost of Nancy's war became clear when she learned that her husband Henri had been captured by the Gestapo in 1943, tortured for information about her activities, and executed when he refused to cooperate. The man who had supported her early resistance work and helped fund her operations had died because of his connection to the White Mouse. This devastating news reached Nancy just as the war was ending, transforming what should have been a moment of triumph into one of profound grief. She had saved thousands of lives, helped liberate her adopted country, and proven that one person's courage could change the course of history, but the personal cost had been almost unbearable. The woman who had seemed invincible to her enemies and inspiring to her allies was in the end human. Her story became a testament to the complex moral landscape of war, where victory and loss, heroism and tragedy were often inseparable. Nancy's transformation from journalist to resistance leader to military commander had been complete, but it had also been irreversible. She could never return to the innocent woman who had once attended dinner parties in Marseille. After the war, Nancy Wake received honors from multiple nations: the George Medal from Britain, the Medal of Freedom from the United States, and the Légion d'honneur from France, among others. But perhaps the greatest testament to her impact was not the medals she received, but the lives she had touched and the precedent she had set. Nancy Wake proved that ordinary individuals can transform into extraordinary forces of change when confronted with moral clarity and the courage to act. She demonstrated that sometimes, to preserve humanity, we must be willing to sacrifice our own humanity, a lesson that resonates far beyond the specific context of World War II. Her story became a blueprint for resistance movements around the world, showing that intelligence could triumph over brute force, that adaptability could overcome rigid doctrine, and that individual determination could challenge collective oppression. The White Mouse may have physically disappeared, but her influence remains visible in every resistance movement that values cunning over strength, flexibility over dogma, and personal courage over institutional power. Nancy Wake's legacy is not just that she was an exceptional spy or saboteur, but that she proved the transformative power of refusing to accept the unacceptable, no matter the personal cost.